Welcome to the WTF podcast. Navigating our emotions can sometimes have us asking, what the feels? That's okay, we're human. And sometimes figuring ourselves out can be messy. But that's why we're in this together. This podcast is all about figuring ourselves out together. So let's see what we're going to talk about today.
The first thing we learn to identify are our physical needs: hunger, sleep, exercise, thirst, safety, comfort. But today's episode is going to that second tier of Maslow's hierarchy, emotional needs. And of course, we have to fulfill these in order to move on to the next level that they call spiritual needs. So what does this level comprise of? Social needs like companionship or even alone time, creative needs like expression, the need to grieve or to be angry, and the need for assurance or justification. The list goes on. But how can we fulfill these needs if we don't learn how to identify them? There's the rub. When clients come to me for emotion code, I ask them to set an intention. This is often them recognizing the discomfort that they're in, or wanting to overcome a barrier that they perceive is in front of them, or maybe envisioning the positive result they would like to see. I then tell them that we are going to make a roadmap to get there. That map is paved with emotional needs that need fixing, that underlie their discomfort. This episode is all about what to do with that roadmap. So today I'd like to welcome an old friend of mine to help me talk about this subject, who I think has become very good at making his own roadmap to get out of discomfort. Hollis Wilhoit, welcome.
Hello, good to be here.
I'm so glad you could join us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And it's been so cool getting to know you again in the last month or so after so many years of just kind of being apart for a while.
Yeah, I definitely think that, people come back into each other's lives whenever, relevancy and joined discomfort join people.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, we're in the middle of a pretty unifying trauma right now. And strangely, some good relationships from the past have resurfaced. And this is one of them. And it's wonderful.
Absolutely. And, I will give a shout out to, especially you've been making a lot of new and old relationships with your podcast that you just started. And
Mm-hmm.
that is really one of the reasons that I thought that you were perfect for this episode. Because I think at one point you had said that the reason you started your podcast was actually fulfilling an emotional need of yours.
Oh, 100%. It was really, really early on. I think maybe at the end of the first week of Kansas City's quarantine anyway. And I had this desperate need to call my father, just like I needed to reach out and I had nobody else in mind. And
Mm-hmm.
he didn't answer the phone. So I started making a list of people I wanted to have conversations with and hash things out with. And that ended up kind of, birthing the idea of the podcast.
That is awesome. I had a very similar experience last night, which was a very anxious night for me. And so I ended up writing a letter to my best friend, Christine, as you know.
Yeah.
And that was so healing for me at the moment. Just, not even getting that immediate gratification of a response, but just reaching out and feeling like you would be heard.
Oh, absolutely. Whenever I'm journaling, sometimes I'll write to a person. I recently found an old journal from like 5th grade. And sometimes if I was missing my mom or my sister or even my teacher, the journal would kind of inhabit their personality. And
Mm-hmm.
through writing them and these people that I think I know well or thought I knew well, I could almost imagine their response in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you can imagine Christine talking right back to that letter.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like even down to the tone of her voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that kind of hits on something I think we'll circle back to later about talking to the right person at the right time.
Oh God, yes. Okay, cool.
But we'll come back to that. So gosh, I just have so many questions I want to ask you, but I think the best way to start this is to talk about maybe your journey of how do you feel, how how good do you feel about identifying your emotional needs now versus previously in your past?
You know what? I think I'm still a novice, to be honest. That's it's been a struggle of mine in the past. Sometimes when I'm desperate to share my feelings, I end up kind of falling into codependency. And then
Mm,
the other side of the coin is a complete shutdown. And
mhm,
so you're almost going nonverbal or antisocial.
mhm,
So it's really been, I- I'd say in the last 3 or 4 years that I've really been able to find that balance.
mhm,
Um, and again, you said we'd circle back to it, but a lot of that journey began with finding the right person to talk to,
mhm.
and yeah, talking to somebody that I felt uh, not what am I trying to say? Not that they wouldn't let me down, but I just knew that they would be present.
Mhm.
And I don't think I had ever found that before.
Mhm. Absolutely. That it's so true, and I think we all feel like novices all the time.
Yeah.
Like we are getting better at it, but we still feel like a novice because the feelings just keep growing in depth and complexity, I guess.
Well,
Um,
right. And it's better than feeling like a master, right? Because then it,
right.
it's what they say about Buddha a little bit. Once you find, if you ever see Buddha, kill him. That's a huge Buddhist teaching. It's because, well, no, seriously, because nobody should reach that level of wisdom.
Right.
And I mean, yeah, if you peak out, then there's nowhere to go. I'd rather be a
Right.
novice.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, to kind of set up, you know, what these emotional needs are,
Mhm.
let's just kind of draw a little picture about what it feels like when we don't identify our needs. And I had a good dose of it last night when I was just kind of speeding my wheels, moving way too fast, being kind of snippy and bitey, and I was uncomfortable, but I didn't know why. And the anxiety, I think the anxiety is probably just a huge outcome of when we feel ungrounded like that, when we don't know what's wrong with us. And I know that you deal with anxiety quite a bit as well. So, what does it feel like for you when you have not identified what you need yet?
Well, I found a new level a couple weeks ago. Again, usually it kind of materializes in a complete shutdown of the senses. I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to smell anything. I don't want to eat anything. I don't want to look anybody in the eye because I will get lost in
Mm-hmm.
the spiral of their own journey, right? And then I'll feel guilt for going through my own.
Mm-hmm.
But I found a new level the other night. I've never been a violent person. I'm pretty pacifistic, and
Mm-hmm.
I've never been one to throw fits.
Mm-hmm.
However, the other day I let myself get in such an anxious hole that I just whipped my Apple headphones against a door like like a few times and busted them. And I've never felt the need to break anything, but it was this weird moment of self-realization where it's like, oh, I've got to get this under control because
Yeah.
I can't be breaking things. That's old news. I hope I've moved past that.
One, I can't afford to break things.
Mary, they're $50 headphones and they worked perfectly.
Well, I hope it was worth it.
It was not.
I hope you were at least singing "Whip It" while you were doing it, like in your head.
Yeah, of course.
I
Well,
say
how
"Whip
could I not?
It." Sorry, I don't mean to make light of your problems, Hollis.
Oh no, I'd rather laugh at that adolescent moment than
Yeah.
take it seriously.
That takes me back to like my temper tantrums when I was a kid. Oh my gosh. Oh,
You had temper tantrums?
oh, absolutely. I was a destructive child. Yeah. I'm surprised my mom didn't make me like replace all the door jambs of the whole house.
What was the thing? What was like the major thing that you broke in those temper tantrums that like you couldn't come back from?
That's a great question. I don't remember breaking anything that I like cared about, like my iPod headphones or anything. It's mostly stuff I didn't care about that my mom cared about, like,
Well, there you go.
the frame of our house, drywall, doorknobs and
Jesus.
things, stuff a kid wouldn't care about.
Yeah, just functional things for living.
Yeah. But I would say, well, probably the biggest thing, my little brother, when he was a kid and I was a, adolescent, I would take out a lot of my anger on him because I just couldn't control him, right? And that feeling of like powerlessness, and
Oh,
being
sure.
like helpless, turned into anger. And so we would just have fights, so probably the scars that I got from those fights are probably the most memorable keepsake.
Keepsake. I love that. It's very positive way to look at it.
But I think that that's a really good point of when we don't have this skill to identify what we need, things go haywire. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it can really spiral our life out of control, not just with violence or anger, but drinking incessantly, searching for escape, maybe just oversleeping to avoid it, procrastinating, losing relationships, if we isolate. There's so many things that can be lost if we don't have the ability to make this roadmap to get out of it.
Yeah.
So, yes. Okay, so, gosh, there's so many places to go from here, Hollis. I just want to go.
I'll go anywhere.
All of them all at once. So, the biggest thing that I teach my clients, once we get this roadmap, and I wish that we could talk more about that, identifying, but it's just, we're kind of sadly going to skip over that. But when we do have those moments of realization where we see what we need, there's a few things that we have to take with us here. And the first is self-responsibility, to set aside blaming others despite who triggered us, like our little brother who just wouldn't do what we said,
Sure.
or the person we perceived as making our problems, and to really take responsibility and say, this is my problem to fix. These are my feelings. I'm the only one who can control them. It's not your fault. What do you feel like is the hardest part about that?
Probably steering away from the blaming of others. We're seeing that a lot right now. If I go outside and there's a gaggle of kids without masks on, that can send me into a really dark spot.
Mm-hmm.
When really I have the control to take a different route as soon as I see them. But there's this kind of I don't know, vigilance against my better motives, where it's like, no, I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to be the bigger person. And it's self-hero worship that is garbage, and not a great place to end up at. I have a really hard time taking control of my own forward motion. It's not a struggle against codependency necessarily, but sometimes when I see the path forward, it makes me freeze. And that's probably the hardest part about identifying, those emotions. It's sometimes the realizations are just so striking and just shocking that they're paralyzing. So I think finding a way to move through that kind of paralytic state is the hardest part for me.
So when you say looking at the path forward, it's almost like once you know what you have to do to fill these needs, it's terrifying the type of changes that might need to occur in order to do that. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's like hero's journey, denial of the call. You know what I mean? I see the end result, but I also see the effort it will take to get there. And sometimes that means, maybe muting some relationships for a while, maybe muting some habits such as drinking,
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge one right now that I know a lot of us are dealing with, that escapism you were talking about. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
coming to terms with the effort to get to the finish line is just, it's shocking.
Mm-hmm. You've kind of walked right into one of the topics I wanted to talk about of why don't we push that button? Why don't we push the fix it button? Why do we procrastinate on what we know we need to do because we see the way out of it, and yet we just are stalling?
Oh, I love that question. I think some of it has to do, at least with people in theater, I don't think they're glutton for punishment necessarily,
Mm.
but the rocky road is more interesting and it makes for a better story. I, as a sane
Yeah.
person, know that that's not true. Stories of success are far more enlightening than
Mhm.
stories of despair.
Mhm.
Um, I also think that there's an element of not deserving the light at the end of the tunnel. I think
Sure.
there's kind of not a self-hatred thing, but just maybe a lack of self-worth that's keeping us from propelling towards the finish line.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I kind of put these in different baskets because there are several ways that we can create these changes, right? So like when you're talking about the kids with the face masks and they make you angry, well, there's no like physical change you can do at the moment. It's not like you can walk up to them and strap masks on every one of them, like
Sure, of course,
that's
yeah.
not a solution to the problem. And really in that scenario, the only solution is a change of mind for you, a change of perspective, how you're choosing to look at the situation, talk to yourself about it. So that's kind of an internal change. But what we're talking about with this procrastination is often an external change, to start exercising, lose weight, eat healthy, stop drinking, or, reach out to that person, or be honest about this lie you've been covering up, or, leave a relationship, or get into a relationship. These external changes often come along with what our emotional needs require, and they are the scariest because it's that physical change in our life that we're kind of resisting so much.
It's funny, we used to break up our lives, at least whenever we were in college. Whenever I think back to a memory in college, I'll think, well, that all happened during, say, the birthday party or Richard III. Like, these things that were taking place outside of the theater, I recognize them as taking place somewhere around a certain show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when it comes to just my life in general outside of theater, I bet I can pin down about 4 or 5 of those external changes that you were talking about that mark significantly new chapters
Mm-hmm.
because they were such tectonic shifts.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about the distinction between sometimes our emotional needs are not the same as what the barriers in our life we perceive are. So, for example, the anger that I felt toward my little brother when I was frustrated with him, I perceived his behavior as the barrier, right? Like, if only he would act different, then I wouldn't feel this way, right? And that gets us so many times. Even last night, part of my anxiety was because my husband was behaving a certain way that didn't happen to fit with my mood at the time or how fast I wanted things to happen at the time, right? And so I
Yeah.
perceived my problem as someone else's actions. But that's not actually the emotional needs, right? Like, my emotional
Exactly.
need was not for him to behave differently. My emotional needs, as I discovered them last night, were, part loneliness, because I wasn't resonating with where my husband was at the time. I was resonating on this other level and I felt very lonely. Part because he's the only other human I have right now, right?
Sure.
But that's why I ended up writing that letter, to resonate with someone else. And again, we come back to that right person at the right time. Everyone can't be everything for us. But I think that's a really good distinction to make when we are trying to figure out what these emotional needs are, to looking below the surface and say what I'm needing is not necessarily what I'm feeling. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. That kind of triggered, in a good way, thought about my mom. I still have many unsolvable issues with my mother. You know, she just maybe wasn't cut out to do it when she did it. Motherhood, that is. And I mean, for the longest time, I blamed her for just about every bad behavior that I ever illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, say if I got in trouble at school or say if I lashed out at my father, it's just because I have this mom that doesn't mother me the right way, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my dad over the years has told me several times whenever I get into that kind of whirlwind, he says, well, this isn't really about your mom being a bad mom. This is about your expectations for her.
Mm-hmm.
And your expectations are dramatically high.
Mm-hmm.
You want something from this person, and that's just, and you know, these things are just things that she cannot do. She does not have it in her to do these things the way you want her to do them.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime I run into somebody I'm disappointed by, say socially or politically or parentally even, I've really got to work on managing my expectations, and that's a lifelong journey. I'm still working on it.
Absolutely. And that definitely goes back to taking responsibility for our feelings, not
Yes.
blaming others. Absolutely. You know, there's this thing that we call self-soothing that we don't have as children. You know, when we're infants, when we're born, you know, we expect our parents to hold us, rock us. Um, Although I guess even in like baby books, you know, they talk about self-soothing as an infant and saying like, well, you know, you have to let them cry. You know, you have to let them figure out some things on their own from the very beginning, so that they don't become codependent, right? Uh, and I think that level of self-soothing gets more complex as we get older, you know, as we take more responsibility. And that's, I think, something that maybe we don't fully uh, get.
No, I'm with you. And I feel like sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for how far we've come through that self-soothing that we may or may not see, right? I mean,
Really.
I I've had a lot of moments, you know, where I felt like a failure as an adult. I think millennials probably all go through that, where it's like, well, I just didn't learn the things I needed to learn in order to become a functioning human. And
Mm.
therefore, I lost adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but some of my self-soothing comes in the form of reminding myself that I am in a house, or I'm in an apartment. You know, it's a nice-ish apartment. The walls aren't closing in. I have a healthy family. I'm myself am pretty much healthy, so I must have done something right at some point in terms of self-soothing. I'm still alive.
Yeah. And it's amazing how so many of the things that you just said are internal changes.
Yeah.
It's all perspective, you know, it's adding gratitude, you know, it's stepping away and looking at the whole picture. And you know, I think that's the amazing thing about working with my clients in emotion code. You know, the reason that sometimes it appears to work so quickly is because so much of the picture is an internal change. You know, that
Yeah.
when we make a choice, a conscious choice to view something differently, it's like this butterfly effect. It just starts changing, trickling down everything, you know, and then yes, sometimes we come across those external changes that move a lot slower. Um, and that's another thing I want to talk about a little bit about moving slowly. You know, once we have this roadmap and we're just waiting to push that fix it button, maybe we're procrastinating getting our finger on it, but it's not going to happen all at once. You know, we have a roadmap now, but now we actually have to do the work to do it, and we're still in this discomfort. So I want to get your feedback on what levels of patience do you offer yourself when you're still in discomfort, but you know you're working through it.
I'm still in discomfort, but I know I'm working through it. Uh, the last huge external change that I went through was a few years ago, like huge, about 4 or 5 years ago. And it involved a move. And I had been building up to that move for a very long time. And it was a move away from a person. It was a move away from a city, from a dog that I dearly loved. Sorry if this is getting too personal.
No.
But the second I had the roadmap, I mean, it took an embarrassingly long time to actually start moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just needed somebody that I deeply trusted, because I didn't trust myself.
Mm-hmm.
I needed somebody to tell me that I wasn't crazy and that I was making the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's not always the case, and that some people don't have that person in their lives, or persons.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're just kind of diving blindly into a wild change, and sometimes that'll work and sometimes it won't.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely I don't need somebody to hold my hand through the journey, but I need someone to hold my hand right before I take it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Put your luggage in the car, close the door, wave goodbye, push you off.
Exactly. Please, God, give me
Make you go.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's wrong to want some kind of, I don't know, cheerleader isn't the right word, but, I've always been a fan of partners in crime. You probably have your everybody has their little club of people that are rooting for you. Yeah. It was weird realizing that I needed them more than I thought I did.
And that is such a good example of, this distinction that, I was telling you about earlier about, self-soothing versus asking for help. And
Mm-hmm.
they're not necessarily different, because when you know you and you know what you need a cheerleader to push your boat off and get you started. That means you can help others help you. And
Yes.
that is so, so important. And I can't even remember how many times I've said it in sessions. Help others help you, because it is not their responsibility to guess what you need. And you may be waiting a very long time for them to play the guessing game. But if you can ask for help in a very specific way, and tell them, I need you to be my cheerleader, I need you to help me leave, whatever it is, then you've done your part of it.
Exactly. And it's so funny. I realized a few years ago, the second you're brave enough and honest enough with yourself to ask for help, I think the better you're going to be at giving it. The fact that you received it, it almost kind of doubles in its energy, and you feel the drive to not like barge into people's lives, but you maybe have this kind of unspoken openness to help others if they should be in a similar situation.
Yes.
That kind of assistance is contagious.
Absolutely. And I want to springboard that into another example from my personal life. And poor Taylor, he gets brought into this so many times. Y'all are going to know a lot about my husband. He loves it. Anyway, I want to really, really nail in the point that we have to respect these emotional needs and also respect them in others. Even if they seem silly or illogical, or maybe, they're not our needs, but they're someone else's needs, we have to not pause on that go button, right? So, for example, during the beginning of this self-isolation, Taylor and I were like jiving pretty good, just kind of loving being home, being really positive about it. And there wasn't really anything that, was obvious about this underlying not okayness, but I'm pretty emotionally in tune by now, and I could sense it. I'm like, something is not okay. I don't know what. And I could tell, like, in his behavior, like, he changes a little when he is still in that I haven't recognized what I need phase. And sometimes it's hard to bring it out of him, So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of all peaked at this this day where I just point blank asked him, like, you're not okay. Do you need to talk about it? Or, do you know why you're not okay? And finally, I think he had this moment of clarity where he was feeling like a lot of guilt about how he was using this gift of free time in isolation, right? I mean, there's so many things we could do with this amazing gift of time. And if we don't use it well enough, with the things that are on our, dream list, we're going to feel crappy about it at the end. And, he was sad that he wasn't doing art, and that, it's one of those, well, one day if, and the day has come, so why aren't you doing it, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I immediately recognized that, as you said, as an emotional need, and I immediately recognized that needs to be handled. Like, no matter how silly it is, no matter how, low priority it may seem in comparison to other things, that needed to happen. And so I got on Amazon and I ordered some canvases and ordered some turpentine, and got it here as fast as possible and set up the space in the attic, and, boom, there it is, right? And now he's doing it, and it's awesome. And you guys have seen that because he does live videos now.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things happening on Facebook right now.
Oh, you're so sweet. He loves that. So, but I love this whole experience that we just went through, because I was like, wow, that was a very good example of recognizing, action, fulfillment, follow through, done, and I'm just like, wow, that's so refreshing when we can do it on that expedited, track. Like, man, I wish it could always be like that.
Oh, of course. And, I think, and this is not a counterpoint at all, I completely agree with you, but there's been this war going on, especially on social media, between productivity and non-productivity.
Mm.
And there's a lot of shame thrown around on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
If you're productive, there is this kind of, there is this less productive group that are saying, or that's saying, there's no way to win this quarantine. Just because you're productive does not mean that you won. And then there's the productive side that are wondering why other people aren't achieving the dreams that they can achieve during quarantine as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you got to ride those waves both ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I empathize with Taylor because, I started this quarantine off pretty productive. And then I fell into about a 2-week lull where I did not want to talk to anybody, and I knew I was unfulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And that was both an artistic and emotional lack of fulfillment. Had Elisa put, the microphone in front of my face to do those podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I would have done it, but there was also something else going on there. Sometimes the creativity is all I need. Sometimes I need a day of meditation to be like, what the hell, where the hell am I?
Yes.
Spiritually. And I know we're not talking about spiritual needs right now, but that's just, yeah.
Well,
I'm
I think that's
to.
a natural, once the emotional needs are met, I think the spiritual needs start calling at you.
Hell yeah.
Those things that you feel called to do or share or accomplish, that's up there. And whenever your, loneliness is dealt with, your anxiety is dealt with, all these other things, suddenly you are able to hear that calling. And that's an amazing place to be.
I love that.
Yeah. So earlier I wanted to go into, respecting other people's emotional needs and how sad it is that competition that happens, like you said, the productive people versus the not productive people. And I hate that we have to project on other people.
Oh yeah.
And it really comes from a sense of justification, because if someone is doing something different than you, then you have to justify why you're doing what you're doing.
And usually that justification comes through attacking the people on the other side and not really detailing what's working for you.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time, and I even see it within my own relationship, because I'm like a very devoid myself of pleasure and feel like I have to be very disciplined. And Taylor is the opposite. He is all about pleasure and not much discipline. And so I find myself getting jealous all the time. Well, I'm like, well, why are you allowing yourself to do that when I haven't allowed myself to do that, right? And so it becomes this projection. It becomes this justification comparison, whereas really I need to look at myself and be like, Mary, if you're jealous of that, you should think about why you're not giving it yourself it, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's, if I were better at knowing my emotional needs at the time, I would not have to compare. And sometimes I can look at that and being like, oh, well, Mary, you're not allowing yourself to do that yet because the thing you're doing right now is actually really fulfilling to you. And that's what you want to be doing. So stop being jealous.
Right. And then the fight ends up being just between you and you.
Right.
Yeah. That's a whole other string of problems. Yeah.
Then you're just in your room talking to yourself.
Like right now. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not here, Mary. I'm not here.
Just a figment of my imagination.
Yeah. Your old friend from college.
Wouldn't that be funny if my real conscious was like acted out by you or Morgan Freeman or someone?
I'm happy to be put in the same basket.
You are the Morgan Freeman of my life, Hollis.
Yes. One of the penguins will die.
So let's go back to how, this procrastination, we don't want to do it. How do we get ourselves to lean into the discomfort of doing it?
I tell you something that's worked for me is, and this doesn't work for everybody because not everybody journals, but I'll go back to, say, a journal from 7 years ago. And typically, these mountains that we climb are all variations on a theme, on the same theme. I'll look back at a journal from 7 years ago and realize that I've been fighting this fight over and over and climbing these mountains over and over for my entire life.
Yes.
And so in a way, for my current situation, that ends up kind of, I don't know what's the opposite of demonizing it. It kind of weakens my situation to a place where I feel like I can conquer it. It's like, I've been here before. I climbed out of that hole. I know I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's clearly just a missing element here. And sometimes that realization is the missing element.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but you can kind of fall on the other side of that, on the other side of the line, where you think, well, if I just keep approaching this mountain over and over again, doesn't that mean that I'm missing something? Is there some like missing part of myself? And I'm happy to say that for the most part, in the last several years, I've been happy to climb that mountain every time, as long as I have that push.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so many good things in what you just said, and it immediately makes me think of, the last episode with my guest Molly. She said when she's ready, she's ready. And
yes,
when we climb that mountain over and over, maybe the same lesson, but in a different way, that's part of us getting ready, that we maybe haven't reached the top to where we're ready to like totally move on to a new mountain yet, but we are learning everything about this mountain, the ins and the outs, and eventually we will be ready to move on from it.
Yes. And I mean, you get sometimes kind of to just dive even further into this metaphor of mountains, sometimes you just get so worked up about the majesty of this mountain that you want to meet the person at the top so badly. And that person's you, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. That's very true. And sometimes I do think we can get addicted to our problems.
Oh yeah.
I know that I do that, and part of it is when I'm not dreaming big enough, where I'm not inspired enough about the next mountain to want to get there. Or maybe I don't know what the next mountain is, and so because I don't want to be lost, and I don't want to feel like I don't know where I'm going next, I just keep revolving around this mountain because it's comfortable.
Sure, it's cozy in the valley.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, but I love what you said about the realization sometimes is what we need. And there is a huge dramatic change about going from that place where we're spinning in darkness, we don't know what we need, and then we recognize what we need. And even though we haven't given it to ourselves yet, or we haven't pushed the fix it button, just the knowing changes everything.
Absolutely. And I find that once you kind of come to that realization, the effort kind of dematerializes or something. There's just this, I don't know, there's just this pull from the center of your chest to get to the end. Once that last thought clicks into place, there is no stopping you or stopping me. I'll only speak for myself.
Yeah, and I almost feel like it's a different kind of discomfort at that stage. You know, the discomfort I felt last night when I was still reeling in darkness was like this worm in my chest that like wanted to just go deeper, and it was like almost trying to turn itself inside out. And you don't have any control of it, and you're just like, oh, this is madness, and I guess I'm just gonna keep breathing. But then as soon as like, you know, something makes me cry, or, you know, I hit that thing, usually if I can make myself cry by thinking of something, I'm like, oh, that's what I needed the whole time, you know. And I just keep going like deeper into that thought of like, okay, what feels powerful now? Like what makes me cry now? Like what makes me cry now? And by constantly surging into that discomfort and kind of making it worse in a way, that is kind of helping me discover what I'm responding to and what these feelings are actually about. I don't know if any of that makes sense. That sounded pretty dramatic.
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's like we're carrying this backpack full of terrible emotions, right? Or terrible traumas. And you know that something in that bag is going haywire and screaming at you, but you got to dig through all the other crap in order to find it at the bottom. And through dealing with all that other crap, you're reminding yourself of so much terrible shit. Excuse my language. Bleep.
You know, I think that's, you know, going back to emotion code, which is funny because you've never done emotion code, Hollis, and you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But I think one thing that my clients are always surprised by themselves is how complex the river is underneath the picture. You know, we're like, oh, I thought I was just mad about this. And then we dig out that backpack, as you say, and we start unloading the emotional lunch. And we're like, whoa, look at all this stuff in here that is rioting underneath. And, you know, if we hadn't gone through this process of unpacking, you probably wouldn't have figured out all this was here. And then how would you possibly find a decent solution for it, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the coolest part, because every time we get to do that, whether it's by emotion code or journaling or meditation or tarot or, you know, whatever it is that gets us to that aha moment of unpacking, we learn something that we take with us to the next mountain. And we get to do that again. And we're like, oh, I remember last time this was more complex than this. Okay, maybe I should do a little more detective work.
Absolutely. Something that's really helped me with that kind of river underneath the picture that you've talked about is, I forget who I was listening to. It might have been Ram Dass. I don't know. But he was talking about how there's, you know, the person you just are in normal life. There's the person you share with others. There's the person that you share with the person you're most intimate with, right? The sexual being, the raw emotional being. But then there's that other person. And it's not that you're keeping this personality a secret. It's just that it's absolutely unfathomable, and it's this secret narrative that you're just unable to put into words. I need to keep reminding myself that that part of me exists and be honest with the sometimes terrible thoughts that guy has. And that allows me to move forward. I know that there's this river of, again, ultimate negativity, but also ultimate positivity. It's the worst and best version of myself. And it's unfathomable.
Yes, and I think that is another thing we have to realize about our emotions. And I use a negative feelings chart and a positive feelings chart when I'm doing my work. And I always like to remind people these negative feelings are not bad, and these positive feelings are not good. It's how they're being used. So if they're being used destructively, then yeah, they're having a negative effect on your life. If they're be using balance positively, they're having a good effect on your life, right? And so, but it's not the emotion itself that should be demonized. And that's what breaks down our honesty. If we have demonized shame or murder or sex or, any of these atrocious feelings, then of course we're not going to be honest about it, right? Like, it's way too scary. We've built it
Too
up
much.
into this horror story. But if we redefine all of these emotions and get a healthy perspective and be like, oh, shame means this, or the fact that I want to murder this person means this, and just really allowing that honesty to come through without judgment about what that says about us. It's almost like taking a third person to these emotions and say, these emotions are not me necessarily. They're what I feel, and they inform me about who I am. I always tell people that your morals and your values are really informed by your emotions. If you see someone torturing an animal and that makes you mad, that informs you a lot about how you feel about the topic, right?
Sure.
So, but yeah, I really absolutely love everything you just said about that. So I don't know why I need to repeat it.
No, you're good.
Is there anything about this topic do you feel like we haven't covered? Because as I'm looking through my notes, I feel like we talked about most everything that I wrote down.
I think I had a question for you earlier regarding the people that we live with, right? Regarding Taylor and Elisa.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to keep their emotional interests in mind whenever you are in a state of total anxiety? This is something that I've been really, really trying to identify in myself and my skill level.
That is a great question, and I'm glad that you asked, because earlier I was going to make the comment about how our spouses and significant others always take the brunt of all of this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a sad thing. So the answer to your question is no, I'm not good at keeping it separate, but I feel like I go through these moments of lucidity where I will realize that I just snapped at him for something that I was feeling, and then I will apologize, and I will kind of build him up for a moment, and then I will immediately go back to my own feelings.
Yeah.
And then I will make another atrocity, and then realize what I've done and apologize. And then I may even start warning him about, what kind of mood I'm in, and give him a heads up.
Okay. So that's something that I've been trying to do a little bit more of. Like recognizing that these peaks and valleys are they're on the horizon. A buddy of mine, director friend, the way he describes his depression, or just really, really low days, is like seeing a storm on the horizon. And it's not that you've come to the conclusion that today is going to be a bad day. It's not settling for a bad day. It's not that you can just see something potentially bad coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can always see those clouds in the morning of the days that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've really been trying to tell Elisa, like, hey, go easy on me today. I'm going to go easy on you. Let's really, really work on sharing, say, the responsibilities of the dog walking or the cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm a novice, so I'm still working on how to word that without gritting my teeth. Like, okay, it's gonna be a bad day.
Yes, I absolutely hear you. And I think in our household, I'm a little bit better about sending out the forecast.
Oh, okay.
Just because I do this a lot. And I'm a little bit more tumultuous, right? Because let's not be, sexist, but I am a female. And I did recognize last night that immediately after I cried and was an anxious mess, that my cycle is right on the way. So so I do recognize that I'm a more tumultuous person by nature, but I actually really, really appreciate that about myself and all women, because I think that brings whatever is down there closer with a microscope, that we actually get the chance to see it. Whereas if we didn't have that microscope, we might not have seen it, like it just makes it bigger. And the downside is sometimes we actually need to step back because we've zoomed in so far, we have lost perspective now. So that's kind of a tangent rant. But I think that Taylor especially has a harder time knowing his forecast, where he's always said about himself that it takes him a long time to switch gears, and it takes him a long time to switch moods. So it's kind of this slow build that sneaks up on him. The same with his hunger. He's like all of a sudden hungry, right? It's like he had no idea 10 minutes ago he was hungry. And so this is just kind of the dynamic of our relationship. So what I'm trying to work on as a spouse is learning how to read his forecast as well and help him find words for it. And because I'm sure this is true with Elisa too, that she's probably pretty good at recognizing when your behavior changes.
Oh,
and,
100%.
and you probably don't even have to tell your forecast, even though it's helpful. It gives more accuracy, but she obviously smells the storm is coming, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that opposite part is asking your spouse, hey, is everything okay? Or are you feeling funky today?
Oh gosh, and knowing when not to ask it too.
Yeah, and asking it in a non-judgmental way, but in a helpful way of, how can I help you? Like, help me help you.
And sometimes, the answer is just, I don't want to talk today. or
Absolutely.
I try not to do that too much, because that's a bit of a slippery slope, and you can kind of get into some emotional, combativeness for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the days that I am honest with myself and her and even my dad about just not wanting to talk, the more the relationships blossom the next day. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I
Uh,
think that's, again, just being very honest about, this is how you can help me. And obviously, if that becomes destructive, where anytime anyone says something and you snip at them, like, for the function of communicating, like, communication has to continue, right?
of course.
And so there's a balance to that. But absolutely, there's nothing wrong with, telling people what you need. Um, that's just part of knowing ourselves.
I
And
know. The other day, my dad, I swear to God, he called me 4 times in the course of about 3 hours. And each time I picked up, I answered, because I don't like to ignore my father's phone calls. I'll deal with the guilt for weeks. But I finally, on the fifth or so phone call, I answered. I was like, okay, this is the last one, but what do you need? I will help you, but this is the last one.
that's awesome. That's so funny. And it's funny how another visual I thought of while we were talking, last night when I was writing my letter, and the right person at the right time, like, the person I was writing the letter to was the right person for my thoughts at the moment. And, I worked through that, and then it kind of brought me to, like, there was the difference between, like, quiet tears and loud tears, right? And
Oh,
it
sure.
was
Yeah.
an interesting, surreal moment for me because, we don't have any doors in our house because we're still doing construction. So even though our house is big, there is no private space at all. So I was kind of like crying quietly, in the other room, and I knew Taylor was distracted. And I was just like really into this self process. And I swear, if he walked in the room, I would have given him the bird, like I was feeling that withdrawn in myself. But then as soon as it kind of switched into like these loud sobs, it was like I immediately knew I was out of where I was, and now I needed a new person. And Taylor,
Oh,
bless his heart, came walking in the room as soon as he heard me crying, and just held me. And he's so good at that. He's so good at knowing, and maybe because we've had so many conversations, right, about our needs, he's so good at knowing how to comfort me in those moments. And I think I've seen men before that they feel really uncomfortable with crying because they think they should be doing something like actively, and they're really uncomfortable with just passive being there, maybe. And Taylor's just always been really good at this. But it was interesting because I was like, wow, even though I totally wanted to give him the bird earlier, if he even showed his face around me, now I'm like completely enveloped in him, and this is exactly what I need now. It's so weird.
oh, absolutely. I mean, it's because you were busy with another fight, right? You have to finish
Right.
one fight before you allow the relief.
Right.
And I'm sure he would have understood had you given him the bird. I want to see it in a sitcom, but I'm with you, especially in regards to just finding that privacy in your own home. We have doors, but we have a dog that will not allow us to be in separate rooms.
Oh, wow, that is hilarious. He wants
Oh,
to act together.
well, no, it's a real shame most days because I know her heart's, I'm talking about a dog's heart. I know her heart is in a good place, and she just, wants us to be this little clan with a C in a good way. But damn it, I'm such a spiritual nomad, and I need to travel where I need to go. And if anybody's screwing up my solidarity or my solitary behavior, I get really defensive.
Oh, yeah. And that is one thing that I've noticed about this whole quarantine. And that's why in, my intro, I said one of our emotional needs might be alone time, and Taylor and I have not had much alone time because we're home all the time.
Yeah.
There's not many places we go by ourselves except the grocery store once every 3 weeks.
Right.
And so the times that, we do separate from each other and, we have an hour or so at home, and Taylor's like, wow, I get so much done when I'm alone, because his mind needs like a lot of quiet time to think. And I don't allow quiet time. I just like say everything that comes in my mind all the time out loud. It's really annoying. So it's been amazing to be like, wow, I wonder how people are coping with just getting enough alone time in self-isolation. Really strange sentence.
No. Well, exactly, because the answer should be simple, but it's just really not. I'm sure people that live alone are even having a hard time getting some good alone time. I hope that makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like away from
because,
the internet?
well, away from the internet and just kind of like out of their own kind of, what am I trying to say? Kind of being alone together. I like my alone time, but I really like going to a coffee shop and isolating, putting my headphones in and being alone, but with people.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me feel like I'm not such a hermit. And then there are these people who are alone that aren't getting quality alone time because their emotions are just screaming so loud in their faces.
Right. It is weird how, I think that's why they have those group offices where you all come and you work together. You're working separately, but together. And it kind of gives you this nice ambience of like the world is going on and you're a part of it. Whereas when you're just home alone, you don't really know what the world is doing and you don't know if you're a part of it.
Yeah, the scope's too small.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so before we end this podcast episode, I want to hash out just a few examples of like what meeting our needs might look like. So these could be like little antidotes of, just for people to visualize of what meeting our emotional needs might be. So maybe I'll say one and then you say one and we'll see what we come up with. So
okay.
One example that I might think of is calling someone when they pop into your head.
Very nice. So Elise is pretty much the breadwinner here, right? Um,
Mhm.
being an actor in town, I don't bring in a lot of money. I'm able to work constantly, but it's tough. So therefore, I kind of put it on myself to do all of the chores and all of the cleaning in the house.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes, though, it can get so overwhelming that I've just tried to carve out a basic sentence, which is, "I need you to do this so I can sit down and close my eyes."
Mhm.
Yeah,
Like adding variety into your life.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, my next example would be reprioritizing. Um, so often we psych ourselves out with stress because we've convinced ourselves that something is a priority when it's not. And so just making that choice to say, maybe I can set this down, or give myself permission to not do this first, can really just take the pressure off.
I'm going to hit you back with something a little similar. Compartmentalization. I think it can be very healthy in some regards. I've been very sick throughout this uh, ordeal. It just so happened to start at the beginning, and it is like a chronic lung thing.
Hmm.
And I needed to come to the realization that my entire life does not revolve around one fact, and that fact involving sickness.
Hmm. Hmm.
I am
Yeah, put
allowed to
that
have
in a
healthy
little box.
thoughts. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, this does not define me. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Honoring ourselves, I feel like, is a huge emotional need. And that can look like you said, leaving a relationship, um, or being honest with yourself about the way that you feel is a huge way to honor ourselves.
Yeah. Even if it's quote unquote wrong or no inappropriate. I've been trying very hard to say to Elisa, like, I feel this way and I feel terrible about it. It's a double whammy.
Mm-hmm,
Here's
mm-hmm.
how I feel, and it doesn't feel good.
And there's so many thoughts about the pandemic that fits that exact description. Like, why am I rejoicing at this fact? Why am I finding so much pleasure in this portion of the pandemic? Why aren't I not constantly sad about all the people that, are dying from this, or the tragedy? Some of the weird things that we get out of this or laugh about in this can totally trigger that, wow, I should be ashamed of myself.
Oh, the duality and the shame involved in that duality is absolutely mind blowing.
Yes, absolutely. But we do have to honor ourselves, and we do have to say, yeah, I laughed at that, or yeah, I felt that. That doesn't mean that it's my entire picture, or that doesn't mean that's my entire understanding of the situation.
I love that. I had a kind of a laughing fit the other night. We were watching a Goofy movie, and I hadn't seen it in years, and I had the goofiest, appropriately, laugh about some bit that I don't even remember, and I ended up apologizing. Like, I'm so sorry I'm laughing so hard. I just cannot stop. And Elisa was like, "We're watching a Goofy movie. You you're allowed to laugh just because we're in a terrible situation." Basically, it does not mean that you cannot have fun and let yourself laugh. It's not against the
Right.
law.
The title implies that you should laugh at some point.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, and that is a huge way to compartmentalize as well. That if we don't put that pain away in a box, we don't allow ourselves to open the laughing box either.
Oh, yes. Praise.
So, okay, well, I hope that gives people kind of a variety of ways to think about what meeting our emotional needs look like, in case it's not intuitive to them, in case it's not screaming at them already, which I hope that it is. Yeah. So thank you, Hollis, for being so vulnerable with me and being so honest, and sharing so many of your experiences. I have really, really enjoyed this episode.
Well, thank you for allowing a place to do so and be so.
Absolutely. And Before I let you go, I wanted to let you know that your podcast was really, really healing for me as well, because all these questions that you were asking other people about, how they were dealing with the pandemic or, whatever, it made me ask those questions to myself. And it's kind of the equivalent of someone saying, "Are you okay?" Like we were saying before, where you don't know until someone asks you the question. And so it started all of these thoughts reeling about, like, wow, I am having all these self-discoveries because Hollis asks someone else a question.
That's really sweet of you to say. I'm so glad that you in particular are listening.
Oh, well, I am really, really enjoying it. All right, let's get back to our lives, Hollis.
See you.
Thanks for coming with us on this journey. It's great to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe on Anchor for the next episode. I'd love to hear what this podcast means for you, so comment on our What the Feels podcast Facebook page. Do you have a topic you want to explore together? Message me to suggest a future topic or even be a guest on the show. I'd love to have you. So remember, until next time, when you got the feels, ask yourself, what the feels?